Hi, I'm Nick Palmisano.
E io sono Matteo Fini.
And this is the Bad News Network. We lost the Notorious RBG to pancreatic cancer this week, and that is truly sad news for America. Ginsburg has been a mainstay in the court since 1993, and while she is famous for many of her majority opinions when it comes to women's rights and environmental law, she's probably better known for her minority dissents. Her minority opinions generally reflected an extremely liberal opinion, even though when she was appointed to the court, she was considered a moderate. She's a true American success story as the daughter of an immigrant father and a first-generation American mother. She fought her way into law school, and Harvard at that, at a time when there were very few women in the law profession at all, and then boldly left Harvard University in favor of Columbia when the dean of Harvard Law called her and other women to dinner and said, "Now why are you women taking the place of a man who could be a lawyer?" She tied for valedictorian at Columbia Law School. Despite that, she couldn't find a job at the time because of rampant sexism. As such, she ended up in academia, and one of her first jobs was as a research associate. When she needed to write a book alongside Anders Bruzelius, she taught herself how to speak Swedish. Because that's what normal, regularly intelligent people do. They just teach themselves another language so that they can write a book in that language. Next, she worked as a professor at Rutgers, where she was told point blank she was going to be paid less than men simply because she was a woman. She founded the first women's rights journal, the Women's Rights Reporter, and made tenure at Columbia. Ginsburg was often cited as a fighter for women's rights, but in fact, she was better than that. She was a fighter for equality. One of her first major wins was defending a man that had been denied a caregiver tax credit simply because of his gender. She also regularly attacked laws that favored women if they didn't provide those same protections to men. Part of this, of course, was a means to an end. By setting precedent for the illegality of gender discrimination, she made it easier later on down the road to fight for women's rights. Those closest to her, however, felt that she simply believed that men and women were created equal. Ginsburg was nominated by President Jimmy Carter to the D.C. U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, where she remained until she moved to the Supreme Court. It's very easy for talking heads to simply dismiss her as a liberal judge. But I want to remind you that it's people like her that we want in the Supreme Court. Her best friend was Antonin Scalia, one of the most conservative judges we've ever seen on the court. They were close because even though they came at the law from different perspectives, they both had unparalleled legal minds, and they both came at everything with a sense of justice. These are the kinds of people we want. Naturally, we've already ruined the opportunity to honor her by making the conversation of her death and the future appointment of the court a violent conversation. In 2016, Republicans refused to give Merrick Garland a vote, saying that the American voter should decide in the next election, while Democrats said that President Obama was still president and that the nomination he put forth should absolutely be voted on. Now, the same situation is in play, and the Republicans are saying that President Trump is still the president and his nomination should be voted on, and the Democrats are saying that the next president should decide because it's an election year. They've seriously, completely flip-flopped their position, 100% flip-flopped their position, with a straight face. They are both simultaneously calling the other party hypocrites. They are both right. I could not do what these people do day in and day out. All they stand for is power. The Democrats have threatened to pack the court if they win this next election, if the Republicans push their nominee through, and Mitch McConnell has responded with, "We're going to push a nominee through." I will now editorialize a little bit. My opinion is that Harry Reid screwed all of this up and created a storm in 2013 when he decided to create a nuclear option for all appointments other than the Supreme Court. The Republicans then paid him back in 2017 by forcing Gorsuch through with the nuclear option for the Supreme Court. Now they're planning to use it again. The court is the place where we're supposed to use both parties to find us the Scalias and the Ginsburgs. We want to find talented jurists that might be conservative and might be liberal, but are willing to fight for the Constitution and the country, not for some political party. We absolutely do not want a SCOTUS made up of politicians. Liberals, you're not going to want to hear this, but for the last 100 years or so, nominations right before an election year almost always go through when the president in power has the Senate, and almost never go through when the president in power doesn't have the Senate. What's happening now isn't different than what always happens. You just hate it a lot more because you really hate Trump. And to be fair, you're shocked by how appallingly everyone lied a few years ago and have completely switched their positions, which I get. But it would be helpful if you saw it in your own party as well. So now the refrain from Democrats is that if they win, they have to pack the court in order to preserve democracy. The absolute opposite will happen. The court will be worthless, and the court will become an extension of Congress instead of a collection of brilliant legal minds. Democrats will pack in their favor, and then when Republicans run, they'll pack in their favor into infinity. Republicans, someone has to stop this escalation, and you're in a position to do it. If this was my choice and my choice alone, here's what I would do. Put up the following legislation while simultaneously starting the nomination process, just in case Pelosi tries to bone you at the last second. Put a bill forth that makes the filibuster an approved procedure, not just a Senate process. Make it so that to reverse course and go back to the nuclear option, you need 66% of the Senate to approve that idea. Formalize the number of justices at 9. If and only if that bill is signed, push the voting for the new Supreme Court justice till after January 20th. If it isn't, put a conservative judge in, just like pretty much always happens, and let the chips fall where they fall. Why? This preserves the union. It's going to prevent the clown car that Democrats are going to kick off with court packing. It also takes off the table the small-minded politics that Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell have brought to the Senate and forces the parties to walk across the aisle to actually bring in great nominations. Conservatives already have a 5-3 majority on the court, if you want to look at it that way, so the risk isn't super high for the Republican Party, and this restores a sense of normalcy and decorum. This brings us back to a functional government. Whether you love the president or despise him, you really can't disagree with the idea that relations haven't been all that great with the parties over the last 4 years. Now, I'm not pretending that it's ever been perfect, but the tit for tat and pettiness is despicable. The Senate used to be the adults in the room while the House was the soap opera. Now, I'm not sure which chamber sucks more. If McConnell pushes this nomination through, the Democrats will not be statesmen. They will want vengeance, like McConnell sought vengeance in 2019, like Reid sought vengeance in 2013. Vengeance leads to where we are now, a completely dysfunctional government. We are not being led, we are not elevating ourselves. We are simply rooting for our team. To some extent, it's always been like that, but there's a certain wickedness to it now. Everyone is so sure of themselves and their positions. People are literally willing to burn the country down or threaten civil war rather than lose. And if you're pointing across the aisle, look closer. Right around the time that I received my nomination to West Point, I found out that I would not be serving under President Bush, but rather under newly minted President Clinton. I was really sad about this because I had a tremendous respect for President Bush. I considered him to be an exemplary statesman. Those thoughts were echoed by comments from Mikhail Gorbachev when I met him 6 months later. But President Clinton would be our president now, and he would be my commander-in-chief. Unbeknownst to me and most people at the time, President Bush had left this letter for President Clinton. It read as follows. Dear Bill, when I walked into this office just now, I felt the same sense of wonder and respect that I felt 4 years ago. I know you will feel that too. I wish you great happiness here. I never felt the loneliness some presidents have described. There will be very tough times, made even more difficult by criticism you may not think is fair. I'm not a very good one to give advice, but just don't let the critics discourage you or push you off course. You will be our president when you read this note. I wish you well. I wish your family well. Your success is now our country's success. I am rooting hard for you. Good luck, George. That's a leader. That's a patriot. That's an American. I sure would like to see a lot more of that from everyone.
The Breonna Taylor grand jury decision came down this week, and a lot of people are not happy, with Louisville in flames, 2 police officers shot, and a whole lot of bad information floating around. First of all, while it was a no-knock warrant, the police were asked to knock and did, contrary to what was originally reported. The officers did knock and did announce themselves, and this was corroborated by the next-door neighbor. Second, Ms. Taylor was not in the bed as originally reported. She was in the hallway with her boyfriend. We also know that Breonna's boyfriend admitted to firing first on the officers, firing 1 shot and striking Officer Mattingly in the femoral artery. He claimed that he didn't hear the officers announce themselves and thought somebody was breaking into his house, so he fired in self-defense. Once that shot was fired, officers believed themselves to be in a gunfight with an aggressor and defended themselves, firing 22 shots and killing Breonna Taylor. One officer, Brett Hankinson, was not in the door with the 2 officers that received fire. Brett fired through a glass window and sliding door at nothing in particular, sending 10 rounds into a nearby apartment that had kids in it. He has been charged with wanton endangerment. Legal experts have basically thrown up their hands and just said this one sucks. Essentially, there were cops on one side of the door trying to do the right thing, and there was a guy on the other side of the door watching his door get kicked in by what looked like thugs while he was trying to do the right thing. If one of Hankinson's bullets had struck and killed Taylor, then he would be charged with homicide because he was the one doing not the right thing. But one of those bullets came from one of the 2 officers at the doors. I know nobody wants to hear this, but the grand jury probably made the right call, even though this is a sad and unfair story. What isn't immune to criticism is the police procedure of these late-night raids. I always try and put myself in these positions. If someone somehow kicked in my front door and came in guns blazing, I would be inclined to light them up. These guys weren't in uniform, and while they did announce themselves outside, apparently the window from them announcing themselves to kicking in the door was pretty brief. This, again, was according to the neighbor. They also did not scream police as they were instructed to do upon entering. This was also a very weird warrant. It wasn't to target Walker, Taylor's boyfriend, as originally reported. It was for Taylor, who was tangentially attached to her ex-boyfriend, who was a drug dealer. Police reports said they did not consider Taylor to be dangerous, so why the no-knock? In theory, if they thought she was involved, maybe the no-knock was to get her unawares so she wouldn't flush any drugs that she had on hand. But is the juice really worth the squeeze, especially considering no-knock late-night raids are exceptionally dangerous? There's also the question of why the judge approved this no-knock warrant in the first place, as the gates set by the Supreme Court weren't met. So what happened here? The war on drugs, which will never be won by the way, coupled with sloppy police work, a terrible judge warrant, and bad execution, created this terrible tragedy. I do not think that a reasonable person can say that these officers committed murder. But there's a whole lot of people, including these cops, who made a whole lot of bad decisions that led to this outcome.
Speaking of shows, the UN General Assembly met virtually this week, and the United States seems to have completely switched positions with China and Russia, which, is kind of weird. President Trump praised his handling of the COVID-19 crisis and urged other countries to put their country first because he would be putting America first. He completely rejected multilateralism and stated that only when countries start putting themselves first will we be able to effectively reach common ground. China's president later responded to President Trump with the quote, "We should reject unilateralism and protectionism," which is comical because that's kind of China's shtick. Even more comical was Putin's quote, which praised the body that he has despised for years, saying, "It's fulfilling its mission of protecting peace, promoting sustainable development of the peoples and the continents, providing assistance in mitigating local crises," which he and China like to cause. The dude hated the UN like last week, but then Trump comes out against it and everybody's like, "I love this place." Meanwhile, Brazil accused the world of lying about its deforestation efforts, which are 100% happening. And Turkey accused Greece of destabilizing the region, which is 100% Turkey's fault. That's the UN, folks.
Headlines broke this week of a Senate report alleging that Hunter Biden was involved with a human trafficking ring. The headlines stem from the report that say that Hunter Biden and some of the other Biden family members were essentially involved in foreign affairs that directly conflicted with the U.S. government and directly contributed to corruption. In the report, suggestions were drawn that Hunter Biden's position on the Burisma board improperly benefited him and other Biden family members. It also says that Hunter was involved with shady and possibly corrupt Russian, Chinese, businessmen, government officials, and bankers. Seriously, it sounds like a script for one of those money-hungry villains. As far as heading up a human trafficking ring goes, though, the report had exactly this to say. The records note that it is a documented fact that Hunter Biden has sent funds to non-resident alien women in the United States who are citizens of Russia and Ukraine and who have subsequently wired funds that they have received from Hunter Biden to individuals located in Russia and the Ukraine. The records also note that some of the transactions are linked to what appears to be an Eastern European prostitution or human trafficking ring. Shorthand, there is a documented history of Hunter Biden banging hookers, many of whom probably were trafficking victims. The bulk of the report circles around whether or not Hunter Biden used trips with his father and personal protection from the Secret Service for personal business affairs. Also, not whether, but how much the Democrats have swept under the rug about the Bidens' conflicting business affairs. And also not whether or not, but how involved were the Bidens exactly in what looks like clear-cut corporate and government corruption, or as politicians call it, business. After reading the report, there's a lot of damning information, but I'm not sure any of it could be called hard evidence that would ruin Hunter Biden even more, or potentially ruin Joe Biden. What I mean to say is that if Nick or I did even a shred of what's in the report, we would be in prison. But we're not members of the ruling class. The Bidens, the politicians, likely nothing will happen. Just remember that this is America, and we're all equal. It's just that some people are more equal than others.
A Chinese military propaganda video got absolutely flamed this week for basically cutting together a bunch of Hollywood movies. The video detected the new Chinese jet, God of War, attacking the U.S. Air Force Base in Guam. The People's Liberation Army Air Force, or PLAF, or just China if you don't want to use words, quickly took the video down, probably because they don't want to get sued for copyright infringement. Not that they would do anything about it anyway, because it's China. The video is literally scene for scene from movies like The Transformers, The Hurt Locker, and many others. Not only is this kind of a threat towards the United States, but it also sucks that I could have knocked this out in like 30 seconds. Their video guy just really didn't care that day. Like maybe he was hungover from the night before and hastily threw it together. I don't know. But nobody uses The Hurt Locker. That movie just sucks. The footage of the new bomber is also quite telling. A Chinese man was seen testing the new state-of-the-art Chinese jet, which was basically him holding onto a cardboard box running Flintstone style off the roof of a house. But he was making plane noises, so I think it counts. Have we just been put on multiple hit lists? Maybe. Was it worth it to report the news? Probably not.
This week at the UN General Assembly, Chinese President Xi Jinping, old habits die hard. Anyways, Xi Jinping said that China will be carbon neutral by 2060. He called for a green revolution and said that humankind can no longer ignore the signs from nature. This announcement naturally came as quite a bit of a shock to most people, but was received excitedly by many environmentalists. According to a report by the Global Carbon Project, China released about 10 billion tons of carbon emissions into the atmosphere in 2018. The same report said that the second place emitters, the US and the EU, combined respectively do not even produce 10 billion tons. Interesting tidbit, going carbon neutral does not mean that a country will cut down its carbon emissions. It only means that it has to capture as much as it produces. I'm not sure how you would do that. I don't know if they make giant carbon dioxide nets and you go out there like catching butterflies or something. I just report the news, I'm not a scientist. Anyways, if China stays on this trajectory, in 20 years, they'll be right on pace with the US.
A lot of people were not super happy with President Trump's response when he was asked if he loses the election, will he step down in a peaceful and orderly manner? The president basically responded that he would prefer not to have mail-in ballots, and that if they got rid of mail-in ballots, then it would be peaceful. He then corrected himself and said it wouldn't be a transfer at all, because if they got rid of mail-in ballots, that he would definitely be staying in power. This essentially sets up the idea that mail-in ballots are going to be inherently corrupt and that people were trying to steal the election from him using them. McConnell was quick to say that there would be an orderly transition of power regardless of who wins the election, which I guess is a good thing. Now, most experts, including people close to the president, don't think he's out to stage a coup or anything like that in the event that he loses the election. But there is a good chance that if he does lose, he's going to leave complaining about the fact that it was corrupt and that the election was stolen from him. This could set off potentially violent unrests in the most ardent Trump supporters, in the same way that we come to expect violent unrest from extreme liberal Democrats anytime somebody sneezes incorrectly or mispronouns a dog.
This week, a family was backing out of a parking lot in a Costco when a man opened their back door and attempted to abscond with their 2-year-old child. The parents obviously got out to confront the pedophile kidnapping SOB. It was less of a verbal confrontation, more of a sign language, in terms of connecting fist to face on the abductor, Alan Galavnik. The father was interviewed after the event and said that he hit the guy once, and then the next thing he knew, he was on top of him, beating him to an absolute pulp. He basically blacked out like Bruce Banner turning into the Hulk and smashed the bejesus out of him. Galavnik, the pedophile, made bail 24 hours later with $100,000. Where did that guy get it? The mother of the boy said she was in tears after hearing that he was released, saying that, what if he does it to somebody else? So yeah, not really sure how to end this one. It would be a terrible tragedy if some, do-gooder serial killer Dexter type out there heard of this and went and paid that guy a visit. We are not condoning any sort of violence here at BNN.
This week we lost another member of the Tuskegee Airmen, Mr. George Washington Biggs. Biggs began flying in the U.S. Army Air Corps when he enlisted in 1943. Later, he flew the B-47 and B-52 bombers in both the Korean and Vietnam Wars. He passed away this week at the age of 95 and is survived by his 10 children, 22 grandchildren, and 24 great-grandchildren. Fair winds, sir.
A zoo in Alaska was broken into this week by an unusual suspect. A wild brown bear who was rummaging through the trash can exposed a part of the chain link fence in the zoo and decided to crawl under it. The thought of a bear breaking into the zoo is kind of like a dude breaking into prison. So maybe Yogi just got bored or lonely out there and just found the thought of not being around other bears or animals totally unbearable. Once entering the zoo, the bear perused the area until setting its sights on 16-year-old Cesar the alpaca. Apparently this zoo is one of those new hip open floor plan type zoos because the bear had absolutely no problem getting to Caesar and eating the living out of him. After finishing his nice alpaca meal, the bear decided to mosey on back to the forest in which he lives. But it seems that sweet succulent meat of alpaca was just too irresistible to have just once. So the big brown bear decided to come back for round 2. But this time there was no delicious alpaca meat to be had, just an angry, well-armed fish and wildlife biologist who shot that motherfucker dead. It was a grisly scene. There is a bright side-ish to this story though. Caesar's companion, Fuzzy Charlie Kozak, was able to escape while his friend was being mauled and eaten alive by the bear. Fuzzy Charlie was then asked what he would do now that his best friend was dead and gone. To which he replied, alpaca up and go somewhere a little safer.
And finally, in Florida Man news, shockingly, there isn't one great big Florida news story this week, so here's a recap of Florida events. A Florida woman pregnant with a future Florida person dove into the ocean to attack a 9-foot bull shark that was attacking her husband. Apparently, local divers and boaters announced some shark sightings, which prompted the couple to take a dip, which incidentally is the opposite of what I would do. The shark attacked, and so did the mom-to-be. As she beat the bejesus out of the bull shark, she was heard screaming, "You put this kid in me, you're not getting away that easily." Authorities commended the woman on snatching her husband from the jaws of death. Literally. Another Florida man stole vials of cat blood from a local clinic. It's unclear what his motivation was or what he planned to do with the cat blood, but I think we can all agree that cat technicians shouldn't be leaving cat blood just feline around. And lastly, that Carol Baskin is being sued by her former assistant, Anne McQueen. The defamation lawsuit states that Carol Baskin claimed that McQueen had something to do with her husband's disappearance. She also alleged that McQueen embezzled money from Tiger Sanctuary. We thought this might be the nail in the coffin for that Carol Baskin, but unfortunately, Anne McQueen died unexpectedly next week. And with that, I'm Nick Palmisano.
And I'm Matt Finney.
And this is the Bad News Network. Our news is at least as bad as the news you're getting already, and I've got to tell you I'm excited because Jorge Rivera is visiting Matt and I this weekend. As always, you can get 25% off at rangerup.com using the code BNN. We also have our OnlyFans account, Nick and Matt. Have a great weekend. Cheers.